What is going on, guys? Today we're going to be taking a look at the FLSUN S3D resin printer. So without further ado, let's get right into it. But first, here's what you get in the box. You get a box, and inside this little box, that's actually my note. You get a little bag, and inside the little bag, you'll get a face mask. Inside, you'll get another little bag. You'll get some really premium rubber gloves. And finally, a top secret USB with a lot of information on it, which you gotta keep very secret otherwise. I'm just kidding. This is just some standard stuff. And inside this USB, you'll have some sample files and some tutorials, and this is the USB stick that you'll be using for your 3D printer when you want to load up some new prints. It is just a standard USB 3.0 Kingston Data Traveler 8GB USB sticks. You also get the AC adapter, which I think is kind of a very short cable, and you can't really even change the cable because it is all part of the same assembly. It does not use a true prong, but it's a standard connection, so you can find this on Amazon if you want to get a longer cable or just get an extension. But yeah, it is a 12V 5A adapter that you'll be using for both the printer and the UV curing process. Then you have 500 grams of 3D printing resin that you can get started with. It seems like it is an in-house brand from FLSUN, and it says that the shelf life here is about a year. And then it has a whole bunch of information listed right down here. And lastly, we have the 3D printer itself. So let's take a look at it. Alright, so here's what we are working with. Basically, this printer can print 108 by 68 by 200. 108, 68, and then 200 upward. And if you go ahead and take the cover apart here, this is where you actually pour in your resin. And then afterwards, you lower this thing down, and then it starts printing, and then your print will actually rise up from under, like some black magic or something. Then you gotta scrape your print from here, and you're good to go. While the whole thing here is actually made from solid aluminum, the base here, on the other hand, might actually be made from cast iron, and it's pretty solid, it's pretty heavy, and it definitely sounds like it. And here's what it looks like on the inside. Basically, it has 4 UV LEDs, and this is where you plug it in afterwards, after you finish your print, to cure it. So back to the printer itself, right down here is something pretty interesting. We actually have a 4.3 inch full color LCD panel, which is actually pretty cool, and it makes this thing a whole lot more fun to play around with. And from the 2 minutes that I turned it on, it looked pretty awesome. So let's quickly go around here and take a look at the back and then turn it on. So in the back we got a cooling fan, 2 USB ports, and lastly the power input. So let's go ahead and power it up. So it seems like it does take a bit to start up. This actually looks really, really cool. I mean, it is an LCD panel, and it definitely looks very welcoming. So it has a couple options here. It has some auto leveling, and I think it's a guide, so we can go ahead and click next. It's telling me to do some stuff, which I'm not sure. So, and the noise you hear here is actually this thing going down very, very slowly. Before I screw anything up, I'm gonna read the manual off the USB, look up some tutorials, and see how this thing works, and then we're gonna go ahead and print something. So, be back in just a bit. Alright, so I figured out how to actually calibrate this thing. Pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, all you have to do is step 1, first take out this black piece. Step 2, tighten these screws back on here. Step 3, turn it on. And steps 4 and 5 are pretty simple and straightforward. For step 4, you actually loosen up these screws on the sides here. Then you click next. Then the platform will actually lower itself all the way down until it's completely flat. And then you tap next, and it will tell you to actually tighten the screws back on there. And the last thing to do is actually tighten these. And if you want, you can tighten them beforehand, and that's pretty much it. You got yourself a calibrated printer. Alright, so in goes the USB stick, and now let's go ahead and select a file. Diamond sphere, let's try that. And before we get started, now I have to actually go ahead and apply the actual resin. Alright, so I've read all the instructions on the PDF, and it doesn't really tell you how much to put in terms of resin. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill it up all the way until this line, and hopefully that should be it. So go ahead and wear the extra small glove that they have provided, because this thing is going to be pretty messy when you open it up. Here we go. And I think that should be pretty much it. And now, all that's left to do is to actually just go ahead and click start. You can actually also see the LEDs down there, or the lasers, or whatever they are. Pretty interesting. Alright, so yes, I did actually screw up, and that is because I didn't reset the platform to 0. I thought it was just like those filament 3D printers, where they automatically go back to home and then start printing. This is the failed part right here, and you can see that it almost looks like a diamond. It's just the base part, or should I say the support structure. I did take it out with gloves. Basically, what you want to do is actually go here, click start level, and then click OK and then confirm. And that will do is it will lower the platform back to 0 in the starting printing position. And after that, you can go ahead and start the print once more. Alright, so we are back. I have left it overnight to print, and hopefully everything is as it should be. So let's go ahead and take a look inside. And there it is. Nice and beautiful. And before we do anything else, let's go ahead and put the cover back on because we don't want to ruin the current liquid that's in there. you can actually see that you can actually remove the support structures on the bottom here very easily. All I have to do is just squeeze this thing and the ball should just come out. Alright, so here it is along with the support structure, so I'm going to throw that away. The quality here is pretty fantastic and it's pretty amazing. But first I'm going to go ahead, dry it up, and then we're going to toss it in the UV blaster. And you want to also take the plug out of the printer and put it into the actual case, because this thing has the plug in here to activate the 4 LEDs on the bottom here. So go ahead and plug that in. You can see we got 4 UV LEDs. And now all I have to do is simply lay it flat like so and let it do its thing. Alright, so we are back, and fast forward a couple days, we have 3 prints. Now, it took a while to actually print the prints. I would leave them overnight to print because my room would smell like tall resin and it's very unpleasant to smell. So I'd pretty much turn on the fan and just leave it to print. And in the morning, once the prints are done, I will put them in the UV box and let them cure. Which is where we are wearing these gloves, and we have learned a couple things, so let's go ahead and take a look at the prints before we get into that. The first thing I printed was this diamond sphere thing, and it was really cool to print. It looked amazing, it cleaned up very easily, and overall it was pretty interesting to play around with. Now initially it was actually pretty soft and kind of rubbery, but now it's pretty stiff because I've been blasting UV into it for the past 3 prints basically, including itself. And here's the crack that I ended up doing when it was soft, so just be careful in some areas if your print is fresh. We can see here that the detail is just insane compared to regular filament 3D printers. It's very detailed, it's very clean, and overall, it is something that you pretty much can't make in this level of detail, and while being this clean and not having to clean up anything other than the resin itself that is still left behind from the liquid. But of course, it is stinky, and it sometimes may not be as strong as the regular filament in some cases, but hey, I don't know much about this yet. These are the only 3 prints I've done, so we're going to be definitely experimenting in the future videos and seeing what kind of things we can end up with. Because I am really excited to check out what other things we can actually do with this thing. I am looking to do very small parts, and I'm actually thinking of printing a mini Game of Thrones throne. Maybe about an inch or so. It's going to be pretty interesting on how that comes out. So maybe stay tuned for that video. But yeah, anyways, we have this thing. It's a ring, and I don't know which one it was. I think it was the dragon one or something. It's got an orb, and I think these are little cobras actually. And you can see the insane amount of detail on these things. You can see the eyes, the mouth, and all that good stuff. What's more impressive is that you can even see the texture in the back of each snake, which is pretty insane. Yeah, overall, a really nice print, very detailed, very impressive. The last print that I did was of this thing right here. Now, I don't remember which one it was, but I'm just gonna call him Boris, because he's got a cigar in his mouth and a bunch of shotgun shells on his left shoulder, which is pretty cool. Now, take a look at his ear right here. It's very, very clean. There's no stringing. I mean, it's kind of fun to print something without having to clean it up and cutting and sanding and acetoning to get a clean print like this. And the best part is that these printers are getting very cheap and you can actually get your hands on them, and they're not just stupidly expensive like regular filament 3D printers were at some point. Now, taking out the support structures from these prints was actually really easy, especially when it was freshly printed. First of all, try not to use a razor. It's kind of hard to not to, because you don't want to really scratch the metal too much. But anyways, you end up with these little nice strands right here. They're very soft, and they simply just rub off. And once you get the print, you can just rub it off like so, and they'll just fall off that easily, as you guys can see here. And again, it's a nice change from having to pry and using a lot of force and having to snip things and ending up with an okay result. Now, these right here are actually not cured, so you can see how soft the material is if you don't actually cure it, and you can actually break it if you press hard enough. So there you go. So what have I learned from printing these 3 things? Well, if you do end up getting this printer, here are some things that you may want to know about. The calibration process is pretty simple and straightforward, as you have saw in the beginning of the video. Just make sure these are tight, and these 2 sides are tight as well, and then you can end up actually unscrewing this and taking this black plate off, so you can actually pour in the resin. Don't pour in too much, just pour enough, just like I did, and refill it as you may see fit. Now, at first I actually kept these little knobs on when this thing was printing to keep the platform from shaking a bit, but it really made it worse because when I had the cover on, these actually get caught up on the cover and it becomes really hard to take out the cover. So now I just leave them off because it also increases the risk of me dropping them when I'm screwing on or screwing them off. And then of course, once you're done, put the cover back on with the side that you actually been using for the resin, so you don't end up with some messy surface. Something that you should keep in mind is that you should clean these platforms as well, because the resin will stay on top of it. This thing does get submerged. And one last tip, once you finish printing, you want to get yourself some rubbing alcohol and spray your print. Make sure it's drenched with alcohol so you can get all the resin off, because it is oil based. Then you want to get some room temperature water and just clean it up. I usually just use a sink, and that's actually pretty much it. Take this thing and slide it right under the UV curing box, and then come back to it after 6 hours or so. And that is actually pretty much it for this video. So yeah, the prints actually take a while to print and cure and clean up, and it's a long process. It's probably more tedious than the filament 3D printing because you'll end up having to clean up and deal with a terrible smell, but hey, you get some insane detail. So with that said, should you get one of these guys? Well, if you've been looking into DLP printers for a while, this is one of the first few models that were released that are cheap. And cheap, I mean not $3,000. But either way, it prints, and it prints very easily, and the LCD panel looks pretty cool. And overall, the printer does work very, very nicely. It's almost flawless. I can't tell. I have to keep using it for a while and let you guys know how it is once I get a bit more experience with it. So, with that said, guys, that is all for this video. If you're interested in this, I'll leave a link for it in the description below. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this video. If found it helpful, if you did, hit the like button and subscribe for content like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.